Welcome to the KrakCast news. We're not going to tell you the date this week, sneaky. See what I did there, Mikey? Gave the game away last week, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And then we didn't post till like Wednesday.
Yeah, it's coming to you absolutely live.
Yeah. So this is usually the time of the news where we moan about the what we're going to talk about, which isn't the greatest thing in the world to start the podcast off. And actually, the gods of linkage have smiled upon us, I think, a little bit this week. So let's not put our usual caveat that the news is boring this week. What do you think, gentlemen?
Actually, we don't have any bores this week in the news.
Oh, we do.
We do, actually.
Oh, we do. Oh, yes, we do. Yeah.
You didn't honestly think I'd be hosting the news and we wouldn't be discussing the Boar apocalypse? No, that'll be coming up towards the end of the show.
Okay.
The highlight.
But, yay, sugar tax, great. The fight against obesity and diabetes is here, gentlemen. We're attempting to bring in, how much money, Mike, with this new tax?
There's even talk about bringing in
70 cents per 1 litre bottle of drink. 70 grosh.
The number out there are still haven't been fixed because it's only the early proposition consultation period of this new legislation. But the hope is to bring in 3 billion zlotys, which would go to NFZ, the National Health Fund, to treat sugar-related diseases or health concerns.
Currently, the annual sugar consumption in Poland is 51.1 kg per capita.
Lot of sugar, yeah.
Sounds like a lot of sugar, you know. But
That's like a kilogram a week per person.
Basically, yeah.
People like sugar, you know. I mean, what do we think about this? I mean, I always see taxes like this, sugar taxes,
sin taxes
as completely messed up. I don't like the arguments that they put forward for them. Basically, blaming fat people for putting stress on the medical system. I don't truck with that argument at all. And basically, I don't agree that this is what they say it is. It's just a tax-raising exercise because they've launched lots of giveaway expensive programs in the last few years and the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and everybody in Poland expects the health system to be fully funded as well. So instead of raising one tax somewhere and then siphoning the money through the budget towards NFZ, they're going to raise a tax where they say specifically for NFZ, because I think the same article that we're referencing right now pointed out that just treating diabetes is about 1.7 billion zlotys a year. So, this extra 3 billion would help cover at least diabetes and maybe some other diseases and health concerns related to obesity and sugar intake as well.
The reason I hate that argument is if you're going to make it all about economics, the only fair way to do it is to take a holistic view of the whole situation and say, well, does a patient with diabetes cost the state more? No, because statistically they're more likely to die young, aren't they? So you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Especially if it's full of sugar.
This is where health advocates go wrong here. They use a very simplified argument, but they don't need to do that. Why not just say that we've too many fat people and we'd like to reverse that? And that still wouldn't be true, but at least it would be a logical argument. I go back to the fact, Mikey, that it's nothing to do with any of that. They know it won't work. They know it won't reduce rates of obesity.
They talk about how it's been introduced in other countries.
It will just raise more money.
It never actually works.
Never works.
And it doesn't raise as much money as they expect it to, and it doesn't actually help with the crisis. I mean, taxes against smoking have been one of the, alcohol especially, has shown that these, generally doesn't work. The only time you can sway is when you have cultural changes, when you make something uncool, which is something you can do with alcohol and smoking. But when it comes to sugar and food,
you say invest the money in a ad campaign by Gwyneth Paltrow or something going to get us all juicing. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, actually. It'd be more effective than what they're proposing.
I'll be honest, even though I'm a small government kind of limited regulation guy, I would think it would make more sense to just have sugary products, something that you can only buy over the age of 18. You can eat it when you're younger if somebody buys it for you, but at least you can't buy it at a young age so you don't get hooked on it, like a drug almost.
That's an interesting thought.
I mean, I this is just an idea that I was thinking about. I'm not too sure about myself, but it's more of an argument I would agree with than a tax in general.
Well, there's also the thing, actually, it probably doesn't apply so much in Poland as it does, for example, in the United States. But something of the increase in the per capita sugar consumption is correlated to the situation we had a decade or 2 or 3 back when everyone was terrified about fat in food because that was harmful.
You hit the nail on the head.
Food manufacturers, in order to still make tasty food with less fat in it, had to resort to adding more sugar because sugar is a flavour in a
complex refined sugar is usually at that, which are the hardest ones to break down in your body.
You really hit something there because this is something I've read a lot about. 50s and 60s, they were doing a lot of studies in the U.S. to try to determine, why obesity and cardiac problems were becoming an issue. And there was a lot of research there showing that sugar was the culprit there, that, for heart disease, for obesity, and other problems. But apparently, there's kind of a conspiracy theories, but apparently there was a lot of pressure from the companies involved with sugar to press against that, and they decided to concentrate more on fats. So what did companies start doing then? So the FDA in the United States decided to recommend foods with less fat in them. This started the whole fat-free phase in society. 70s, 80s, and 90s. When you get rid of fat, things don't taste so good, so you have to put more sugar in them. And all of a sudden, these fat-free products have twice as much sugar in them. And boom, what do you notice? At the same time, obesity problems go up. Cardiac issues also have been increasing since that time, even though food has less fat in it since then. The reverse of this is the whole talk about keto diets, Atkins diets, and etc., where you concentrate more on fats while cutting out carbs. And even though this also stresses the body, it seems to be a little less harmful than eating a lot of sugars and simple carbohydrates. And
I think there's a conclusion we can draw, which is that this is one area where you really do not want to trust the so-called experts because dietary advice has varied so dramatically over the last.
It's like saturated fats, Josh. You remember the war against cooking with beef tallow, a stable fat that has been used for cooking because it produces amazingly tasty results.
Fries and beef tallow.
Oh my god! Yeah, and then they switched to all these dodgy, vegetable oils and corn flour oils.
Polyunsaturates.
And then it turns out that it's trans fats are the really big problem, and we've been actually switched to far more damaging products. Same thing with butter. We were told for years to use margarine, to use low-fat spreads with emulsifiers in them, and it turns out, of course, natural fats are much more healthy for you. I say, of course, like I was always ahead of the science. But it's ridiculous. Just call it what it is. I would love a bit more honesty from governments around sin taxes and just say, you know what, somebody's got to pay for this, and if you don't like a fatso, write a letter. Okay, but here's another thing as well I wanted to discuss. What about the black market? Even with soft drinks, that might sound like a strange statement. Well, what's to stop a bar that's close to the German border saying, 70 cents actually a big chunk out in my bottom line, 70 gross, excuse me. I'm going over to buy them in bulk in a van from Germany from a company that still has common sense, or the Ukraine or something like that. It's a very delicate balance between actually making a sin tax even collect more money by letting the black market take over.
These taxes ended up collecting less money than they expected to because people's consumption drops, but more generally there's an increase in the black market. Oh, and one more thing that will piss you all off about this, they're not just talking about sugars and sweeteners here. They're also talking about caffeinated beverages, anything with taurine or guarine in it. And caffeine, for Christ's sakes, that's perfectly fine. You're going to cut me off for my caffeine, you bastards. I'm going to come after you.
I was a pretty tubby teenager, right? My mother never bought soft drinks, never kept chocolate in the house, would beat you out of the house to play football in the morning. Get up and go and play with the traffic would be the attitude if you're sitting around watching TV. She wasn't having it. She was an active woman, and I still got fat in my teenage years, much to her annoyance, because I wanted to. You can't stop. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink unless it's a nice cold Coca-Cola. But look, I just like biscuits and shit, and I knew it was unhealthy, but I chose to do it anyway, and I slowly watched myself get, really tubby, and I thought, Dave, you dumbass, why'd you do that? I didn't think, the government really should have priced that can of Coke up then. This never would have happened in the first place. I would have definitely had an Avion, because everyone knows bottled water is really cheap. Oh, no, it's not. It's an absolute rip-off, isn't it? So. Anyway, I think we can possibly move on. Don't support sugar taxes. I think they're stupid.
Fight the power.
This is something even the Danes fought back on, the ultimate social democracy with these kind of laws. And they're just like, you know what? No. Take a sugar tax, shove it up your... Moving on. Autonomous trams, Mikey. These are a development that excite me. they're funny at the moment because, of course, all autonomous vehicles still need a human being sitting there, scratching his arse. But we are rapidly getting to the stage where cars on an open network with lots of entrances and exits and different types of vehicles are able to drive autonomously. So my question to you is not so much... is it impressive we have autonomous trains? Is why haven't they been here for like 10 years already? It seems pretty simple to me. They run along tracks that should be automated.
Yes, well, basically the story came around just a few days ago when in Krakow they tested a semi-autonomous or more an automated tram for the first time. They did it in the middle of the night, literally a few minutes before midnight on Monday night and Tuesday night, earlier last week. And it was only on a small section of track, almost a completely straight one from Muzeum Narodowe, the National Museum, to Cichy Kącik, which is about, I think, like a kilometer and a half, or something like that. So, they had a lot of confidence in their technology, I'm guessing. But, at first I was really excited when I read about this. Oh, autonomous tram. Then I'm actually looking into it. It was more automated than autonomous. This tram, opened the doors, closed the doors, knew when to stop, knew when to change the wiring and when to speed up and slow down. But there was actually one thing very important in there that I only noticed when I read a few articles and interviews with the people working on this. There was nothing about collision avoidance or obstruction detection in there at all. They don't have anything like that at all in there. And basically what they want to do is just to make life easier for the driver, where it basically just presses the forward button and the back button without having to press any of the other buttons that you do as a tram driver because, God forbid.
Some things are more complicated. Like you say, they'll be the last pieces of the puzzle. It's like in football, we saw goal line technology and we got all excited, and then we saw VAR and we thought, fuck the future. I want to go back to the past and live.
I have to say, I'm sure you guys have observed similarly, but particularly in the increasing numbers of modern up-to-date trams that we have on the network here. If you'd take a look in the cab, the dashboard is absolutely massive, stuffed full of all kinds of dials and instruments, and you're thinking, okay, this is a thing that can go forward. You don't need a steering wheel because it's on tracks. Kind of like, just what are all these instruments? Just what do they do? It's like dive pressure, altimeter, kind of an airspeed indicator.
It gave me one of
core isn't too hot. Yeah.
This story gave me one of my big thoughts, which I've been, teaming maybe to do a special kind of segment on Dave's big thoughts. The way it's going to be a big issue in the next 20 years, because say 1 in 7 or 8 people in the US, for example, drive for a living. That's what they do. Truck drivers, delivery drivers, Amazon drivers, Uber drivers. And we keep fretting about all these millions of people being put out of work. But actually, it's going to be fine, isn't it? Because now every car has a big, beautiful touchscreen console, or will do in the next few years. And they're going to be semi to fully autonomous. And there's going to be this great kind of bridging period of 3 to 5 years where being a driver would be the greatest job in the world. All you do is sit back and study for your next degree. So when you get completely made obsolete, that you're ready to move into another industry.
Plus, you always have to remember that how many times in history have we seen an era where one group of society apparently becomes completely redundant, yet, unemployment goes down. We're talking about, the Industrial Revolution, when all of a sudden you need so many people working out in farms, but yet still somehow employment, was skyrocketed. And I think this would be, a similar situation where people are really paranoid. What are we going to do with all these, low-skilled workers? But somehow, when there's more free capital, there'll be more potential for this capital to be invested somewhere, and new jobs will be created.
Well, there's also the
creative destruction.
There's also the fortunate correlation that normally these innovations come onto the marketplace precisely because of economies of scale. It means that money is saved, which means that the goods are cheaper for the end user. And we see this throughout history. There are kind of, there's, if you see the early James Bond films like Sean Connery in his Aston Martin, and he's got a telephone in his car, and this was something that was completely unavailable to regular people because the cost of having a mobile telephone in the 1960s was utterly prohibitive, and the technology was very, very poor. But then you get to a situation when actually having a mobile telephone is not just, there was a time in the 80s when it was expensive, but it was kind of more doable. And now you have a situation where, never mind the kind of developed world, you have like vast tracts of like Africa and Asia that were previously, more or less primitive, where people are now able to kind of like function in a business environment because of mobile phones, even if there is no kind of like landline technology or infrastructure there.
They don't even bother building up a landline technology there. They just build
absolutely
cell networks because it's
redundant,
cheaper, faster, better.
And everyone gains.
Yeah. Go progress.
That's what it does.
Yeah, no, look, autonomous driving is on the way. I mean, it's going to be facilitated by the next generation of chips that are being built by my buddy Molesy, that kind of that new 10nm kind of standard nanometer standard of
we're
wafer.
Down to 5 nanometer productions in some.
Yeah, but not for like standard desktop and stuff like that.
We're at 7 nanometers for that. If we're talking like the ARM processor in a phone, iPhone or something like that.
Yeah, he works on the bigger stuff, Mikey. But they're
Intel's way behind.
They're installing the new fabs, around the world. And you're right, actually, it's different companies that'll be doing most of the smaller chips.
Huawei.
Didn't expect you to know so much stuff about it. Malty's going to be furious at me now for not defending his honor bearer. Okay, fucking hell. Got me nanometers all mixed up. Fuck you, Mike. Okay, so some fucker took a stroll across the square with his pants off in front of the Sukanitsa. How do we feel about tourist penises, Michael?
Doesn't really do it for me. I'm sorry. I mean, I see a tourist with his wang swinging left and right there, and I'm just thinking, no, not for me, But yeah, he decided, that he had to go and decided to drop his pants, drop his underwear, didn't know where it was, and piss on the Sukanitsa. So he's fined 500 zlotys for public nudity, plus 500 zlotys for pissing in public as well, So
I hope the police kind of gave him a good surreptitious kicking in the whole arrest process as well.
How do you kick someone surreptitiously?
It's something the police are very good at, I believe.
They don't leave a mark, but your balls hurt. Yeah.
I just wanted to repeat that word. I've always loved it. Okay. So he was fined 500 zloty. Not too much you can say about
1,000,
that.
To go.
Boys will be boys. It says 500 in the article, Mikey. Don't fuck with it.
No, but he got 500 for what's it called, for being nude, and 500 for pissing.
Right, we'll be back in a minute. Me and Mikey are going out to fight to the death.
But we're keeping our pants on. It's going to be a pissing
little sword fight.
It's going to be a French duel.
Okay, Krakow is about to have more cars registered in it than people. This story got me thinking of something that I had saw and literally could not believe my eyes. I hate when people say literally when it doesn't mean literally, you know what I mean? I'm sorry for that inexcusable burst of millennial speech. But it bugs the fucking
boomer.
shit out of me that Krakow has such a bad traffic problem. Because the TomTom congestion study has Krakow only 5 places behind Dublin, my notoriously bad trafficked hometown. And you're thinking, why?
Is this a global
global
thing?
index.
So,
they measure about 500 cities.
Like kind of like Bangkok and Kuala Lumpur and, the places that are like, what's it, like Ho Chi Minh City, with the places where you just cannot move at all in any kind of vehicle at any time. They're presumably top of the table.
Presumably are. London's dropped way down late 20s now.
Because nobody can drive in London. So
that was my point. The congestion charge obviously had some kind of effect. But astonishingly, I couldn't believe how high Krakow was in the rankings. And I'll tell you why, Mikey. There's no need to drive in the city. If you live within 5 miles of the city centre, inevitably, or maybe 3 miles, there's inevitably a tram you can get. What is the reason so many Krakowians insist on travelling by car, even though it is not anywhere near as quick as using a tram?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, a lot of people don't live within like the 5 kilometer radius of the city. But if you want to go from point A or point B in the city, a lot of the traffic is funneled through the center of cities. So you have old city streets and a network not designed for so many cars. And there's really no way to get around a city. They're trying to build a kind of a beltway structure around the city right now, but it's still going to take years for it to completed. It's nowhere near the capacity they need. And there are more cars every single day. Right now, as of the end of 2019, I think it was about 730 some cars per 1,000 people in the city. We're up there with some of the most populated cities in the world when it comes to car traffic. More than London, Berlin, New York, or other places known for traffic. Mm-hmm. Well, London is kind of an exception there.
The top 5, since you keep kind of referring to the busiest countries in the world, are Bengaluru in India. Number 2 is Manila. Number 3 is Bogota in Colombia, of course. Mumbai in India. Pune in India. Moscow, number 6. Lima, number 7.
Lima.
I know, I didn't
Those
see that
damn
coming.
Peruvians and their cars.
Yeah, New Delhi is number 8, Istanbul is 9, and Jakarta rounds out the top 10. Bangkok must have made some improvements, Josh. There's a lot of new sky trains in Bangkok when I was there a few years ago, and that's down to 11th, but you're right, still pretty high up there. Kiev, Mexico City, Bucharest, Recife, St. Petersburg, Dublin. I've always thought Dublin's traffic is explainable by the fact that it's kind of a suburban city, low rise, it wasn't really designed properly. There was a lot of housing estates built on the edge of the city, and then they had to be linked together
that's
with roads.
the English again, isn't it? Yeah.
No. Your part of it's all right. I mean, I'm mostly blaming the Irish for this, to be fair. The old Victorian, city centre is it's a beautiful city.
Grand, even.
It's grand, sure. But my theory about Krakow's drivers is the... how should I phrase this? Most people who you meet in Krakow who work, say, for a corporation, they're from a small town a couple of 100 miles away or 100 miles away or 50 miles away. And they need to get home regularly. Let me finish. They need to get home regularly, and it's a pain in the arse if they have a wife and kids to get the bus, isn't it? So a lot of people who live in Krakow have a baked-in need for a car, even without... Because I disagree with what you were saying earlier. If you plan where you work, where you live... you should easily be able to do a connected by a convenient tram route.
A little too far out. Plus, there's talk about these like park and ride systems where you drop off your car and you get on a tram or a bus, but the parking lots are built in a way that you still have to drive to them.
Ridiculous idea.
And then once you're already in the car, you might as well drive the extra few minutes to get to work instead of parking and waiting for a tram and getting stuffed in with a bunch of like homeless people in the cold.
The only feasible idea I've ever seen, and it'd probably be ridiculously expensive, is to build enormous iceberg car parks at the rondos that are all within walking distance to the city centre, Mogilska, Zhezhevska, etc. So the idea being, you drive in, you park, and then you either walk or you get to...
Well, I think in a way the city has probably got the most kind of workable approach to this that you can have in a situation like that is that you drastically limit the number of parking spaces available in the city centre, so that the only reason that it makes sense to even attempt to bring your car into the city centre is if you're just going to drop somebody off, or if you're on your way through to somewhere. Of course, once they get orbital roads and things sorted out, then hopefully that latter part of it will be somewhat obviated. But I think it's worth remembering that, for a lot of people who are kind of like upwardly mobile here, if you live in the city, within the city boundaries, your ambition really, because you probably live in an apartment, but your ambition is to have a house. And except for, the handful of very rich people, it's not really possible to have a house in the city. So people have houses outside. And once you get outside the city limits, you may be the case that you work in the city, or that you have like a pied a terre, or a one-room apartment in the...
Pied a terre, I love it.
I don't even know what that is.
And if you live in one of these kind of towns that's like, or villages 15, 20, 25, 30 kilometers outside of Krakow, then public transport isn't really necessarily that convenient for you. So you get in the car, and like you say, if there isn't kind of like a convenient park and ride on the outskirts of the city with loads and loads of regularly available parking spaces, then you might as well just keep carrying on.
A pied de terre is what the country gentleman would have as his gaff out the country and his little apartment in the city.
Well, yeah, shag pad for company directors. Yeah.
Okay, I know that word. What you also mention...
It's a word of a certain generation. I love that, Josh. You're on fire tonight.
What we should also mention about these cars here that are registered in Krakow is that even though the prosperity of the city has increased in the last 10, 20 years and people can afford better cars, the average age of a car in Poland, in Krakow, is still 12 years. There's still, most cars here are used cars. So, they're getting rid of the coal furnishers in the city. But the amount of cars in the last 20 years has tripled, more or less. And there's still old cars, with diesel engines or, other very polluting, emitting engines.
Well, okay, but I know a little bit about this. And that is, if it's a petrol engine, then all cars made since about 1992, I think, have catalytic converters. So they are not polluting.
All right, let's not get into all of this.
With diesel.
KrakCast tangent, classic tangent, PM 2.5.
Just because I'm feeling kind of contrarian, there's another point I'm coming, because you started off this segment with the shocking news that there are more cars registered in Krakow than there are
Well, there will
citizens,
be
people.
And then I backed it up by saying it's the 22nd worst traffic on Earth.
Right.
So it is an issue.
You could look at this from another angle, which is that there are lots of people with cars here who are not registered as living here, although their cars may be registered here.
Well, this is true as well, but you have to also realize, I think this statistics say there's about, outside of the 700,000 cars that are registered here, about 300,000 cars per day drive through the city.
Krakow has horrendous traffic. Anyone who's ever tried to run a business in the city centre, as I did for 8 years, and has to go out to macro, no matter what time of day you tried to do it, it was a horrendous commute out there and back. Out to Opolska, especially from the city centre, is a particularly nasty journey. It seems to me that you can dance around it all you want. There is a huge class of Krakowian that could do without a car, but chooses to drive every day anyway. Because guess what? People like having the radio on. You know, they're going to have a cheeky fag out the window on the way to work. They're warm. And actually, people are going to get into a habit of sitting in traffic. You know, they kind of get into a routine with it. You know, at least they're comfortable. You know, they listen to the radio.
Okay, well, I got another, just because obviously we don't want to prolong this not very interesting segment more than absolutely necessary, but I used to drive, commercial driving in London before the M25 was completed.
What's the M25, Josh? Not everybody knows the road network.
The M25 is the motorway that rings the entirety of the outside of the Greater London area.
The ring road.
Which means that you can come from someplace outside of London to go someplace way the other side of London, and you're not obliged to drive through London. You can go around it and instead be parked in a traffic jam on the M25, but that's another story.
Yeah, yes. We have a similar system in Dublin, the M50, and it's also known as a car park.
The point being is that there was a time in the early mid 80s when a substantial percentage of the traffic in more or less central London was traffic that had no desire to be in central London, wasn't going to central London.
Going through it.
It was on its way from somewhere to somewhere else. And one of the problems that Krakow has is that it does not have a complete orbital motorway system enabling people. And there is, there's transcontinental traffic, literally.
Josh, I'm noted to quote a very funny quote I heard on the radio there a few months ago that says, adding more roads and expecting congestion to improve is kind of like a fat person loosening his pants and expecting to get skinnier.
No, it's absolutely true. But the point is actually bigger even than that, is because road traffic is a good thing in terms of it is increased trade, communication, deliveries. No, it is absolutely true.
Of course that's true. Of course that's true. That's an assumed given, of course.
What we don't want is that increased traffic coming through a region where it doesn't even want to be and where it's causing problems in that region.
Mike touched on it in the food segment earlier, and I do believe there is a lot to this, and it applies to a lot of different areas of life. It's actually cultural trends that change behaviour. It's a weird thing, isn't it? You know, especially nowadays with Twitter and Facebook and everything, that people, misguided often, you know, they come up with ideas they think will help the world, and they kind of, you know, they follow through on them. And there certainly could be a movement in Krakow where you could say to people, look, if it is possible for you to get the tram to work in 25 to 30 minutes, why on earth do you pay for a car? Forget everything else. Why do you pay for that expense? You know, I really don't get it. I think there is a massive amount of people in this city that could live without a car, but for no other reason than the fact that they've always wanted to have a nice car, And I think it's stupid. I really do. It's like in Dublin, where households have 3 cars, and you're kind of going, why do you have 3 cars? Why do you need 3 cars? Like, you know?
No, you're absolutely right. But I suspect in this country that is something that will...
cars out of trees.
Oh, racist. It's a disability, Mike, all right? I can't say the fucking word tray. I could try 33 times and I wouldn't get it right.
This is a kind of a rebound from the kind of, you know, the kind of imposed austerity from the communist era, and then I think that
I get that as well.
The car as a status symbol and as a symbol of personal individual freedom. I mean, my God,
I think you're on more solid ground there. Actually, I think that is actually probably
America is built on that, and I mean, you know, to this day, I think kind of, you know, there are many Americans whose, you know, their right to drive a Ford 150 and kind of, of,
You can only put so many overpasses, though, till people start to, be affected by fucking G-forces.
I absolutely agree. But once it kind of wears off, it's like, look, do I really need to have like a 3-year-old shiny BMW outside when I can just take the tram and it's going to save me like 10,000 watts a year?
I think we're about a generation away in Poland.
Yeah,
they need to go through that phase.
Right. Okay. I've been told that the best way to get new listeners is to alarm people. The coronavirus is coming to Krakow. Most definitely it's not, but maybe it is. Michael,
but wash your hands.
So that's squeezing limes into beer bottlenecks, yeah.
Mike, I have a few questions about this. You're on the spot now because you're Johnny Doctor. Right. We'll cover the global thing next, okay? But tell me about the Polish people who've come back from Wuhan and the steps the NFZ, the government, have taken to make sure that they're quarantined and safely can.
There have not been any full blown quarantines. Quarantines.
There's not been no need, basically. Yeah.
No, they've sent them all off to be tested, and apparently nobody has come back being tested as positive.
Much to the disappointment of the Polish media, in my opinion.
Even here in Krakow, in Zadomskiego, they were testing 2 girls and a couple of students that came in from China, and then the girls were were on a trip in Asia. They felt a little, under the weather, as you sometimes do after, flying on a plane for 20 hours.
Or in January.
Exactly. And but all of a sudden, like, you read the newspaper, like, suspected coronavirus. Like, no, they just kind of felt like crap. And there have been situations like this here in Poland over the last few days.
I was amused to read something about this. This is not exactly a sidetrack, but it's kind of related. But there was talk about kind of epidemics and pandemics in the past and how they were dealt with, because one of the issues with this coronavirus is because people can so easily travel the world and jump on a plane, and that infection can spread very, very rapidly. And I agree. There's definitely room for sort of caution there. But one of the things was interesting was the Black Death, the plague in medieval Europe, and actually Poland didn't suffer particularly badly from that. And the reason was apparently was that they just completely closed their borders. It was like nobody was allowed into Poland while the Black Death was raging. And it's kind of, if you have a Black Death map of like blackness over Europe and then an absence of blackness, which is more or less what was Poland.
So they kept the blackness out of Poland, and you're saying that was good for them? Racist.
No. Well, I think the point is it's not so much kind of allowing people to leave your country as not allowing them back in,
No, well, look, back in medieval times, we didn't have the World Health Organization and tens of thousands of scientists that could be instantly sprung into action. I mean, they've already isolated it and recreated it in a lab in Australia.
They already have a test for it, yes. The whole issue here right now is a lot of people suspect that the Chinese government was a little lax with its policies and a little behind, that they only brought in these quarantines about a week and a half ago, when they already knew at the big there are some stories saying that even in December that they already identified that there was a problem, something major going on, and some people are saying that there were even cases in October and November that could be linked to this. And if the Chinese government had acted quicker to quarantine or to slow movement of people, that it could have been prevented. But the truth is now they brought in these quarantines so late when a lot of people have already traveled around the world. And, the incubation period for this is anywhere from 12 to 14 days. So people were already moving before the quarantines were brought in that won't show symptoms for the next couple of days anyway. So if it was going to spread, it's already spread.
Okay. Right. Okay. So are you saying to me that you are actually alarmed by this?
Not really alarmed, because there's always a chance for a pandemic or something serious to happen, and this happens every year. It's called the flu.
Exactly. I honestly, I keep looking at the story and trying to find something to be alarmed about. 2.2% death rate. I'm not saying it's not a serious outbreak. It is, of course.
2.2 is quite.
Well, are we not overreacting in Europe? Isn't it ridiculous? Every story I see is like this guy Arek Ratai, this guy who's stranded in Wuhan. So of course now he has to make a documentary or something. There must be already 12 documentaries on YouTube of expat wankers running around with cameras going, look, there's nobody around because of coronavirus. Oh, mate, you finally got your 15 minutes, didn't you? Well done.
Common sense, wash your hands, don't lick the handrails on a bus or a train, and you'll be fine.
Steer clear of bat soup as well. I think.
Exactly. And if it's going to spread, the Chinese were already too late. 2.5% is quite high. The one thing I will say is I don't trust the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to statistics and math. So when they're officially saying that the numbers out there looks like 2.5%, that already looks a little scary to me because that means it's probably more like 5 or 6 or 7%.
I mean, Wuhan's in total lockdown. I mean, it's an extreme quarantine.
They locked it down a week too late.
A week too late. Never in all my life have I heard of like a massive US city being locked down for a virus. I mean, I think the Chinese reaction has been pretty strong. Like, actually,
well, here's a couple of things that I think need to be thrown into the mix here. One is that rather like AIDS, this is something that is a very, very scary thing that is nowhere near as rampantly contagious as people might fear. And we know this because if it were, we would already be like seriously up to our necks in very smelly stuff. The other thing is that like other viruses, like, you know, flu and similar things like that, is that the vast majority of people who even contract it survive, because it is the kind of thing that if you are, you know, malnourished or weak or vulnerable or already ill with something else, then, you know, then your chances of succumbing are far greater. But
I mean, that Ebola outbreak a few years ago, like, that had me a bit concerned. I mean, Ebola, like, you know, apart from having a Dustin Hoffman team movie, you know, it is a genuinely scary disease.
So, yeah, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, like you say, Mike, 106 people, you know, it sounds awful. And look, this is a big problem in China where it's localized, but I just think the international reaction, it's like the 24-hour news media cycle springs into action. And is it not like by day 2 that it's nearly like we're enjoying this? It's like, oh, this is our version of Outbreak. You know, let's have lots of shots of people in hazmat suits. Let's have you know, close-ups of people in the NHS who are just having a random
invest in face masks.
You know, face mask close-ups all over the Daily Mail. Yeah, let's scare the shit out of people, because that's what really works. Like what we're going to try and do with pigs
that's
next.
That's the job of the news, isn't it? I mean, I saw a headline like this morning, I think, which is, you know, like officially, you know, coronavirus is now as serious as SARS was. And I'm like,
SARS wasn't that serious.
Well, we can feel pretty, like, kind of okay about that, really.
One thing I wanted to cover is, of course, the example that always comes up is the yellow fever outbreak in 1920. An estimated 25 million people or something died worldwide. I mean, just a phenomenal death rate. It was even more than that, was it? I mean,
it was more than died in actual World War One. You know.
Yeah.
Well, there was also the Spanish flu immediately after World War One, which killed more people than World War One did.
Spanish flu! I got my Spanish flu and my yellow fever mixed up today.
Right, okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I meant Spanish flu. Yeah.
But I mean, and actually, an interesting thing about that is because I shouldn't be even like sounding like I'm laughing.
50 million died of Spanish flu. Wow.
Because of the, you know, like the whole of of Europe really was kind of like economically depressed as a consequence of the First World War. There were huge numbers of people who were, you know, on subsistence rations. So, you know, people were weak.
Yeah, okay, so they were more susceptible once they got the virus, and the death rate was higher before. It was the absolute, I have seen that point made before. It just came also at the absolute worst time it possibly could have come. Yeah,
and you had a lot of people traveling around the world because of, you know, the war and coming back from the war, so it just spread.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm.
It infected 500 million people, 1/3 of the planet's population at that time. Look, I get why there's a massively scary precedent, you know, but at the same time, precedent schmecedent. You know, we've got armies of scientists now, like, who are all just waiting to jump into the fray if one of these epidemics breaks out. And I you know what? I don't want people to say I'm being cynical here, because nobody listens to the show anyway. What I'd like our loyal listeners to know is that this is me showing faith in the world's scientists. Well, I believe in them. I believe in the World Health Organization. I can't stand the General Assembly, but I believe in them.
Who do you believe in?
The World Health Organization.
Who?
Well,
yeah, you whoosh. The telling thing, WHO, who, yeah. The telling thing here is that, you know, news of this has broken in a big sense in the wider world in the last like 2, 3, 4 weeks maximum, and already medical scientists are on the brink if they probably actually already have a pretty good idea of some kind of vaccination or.
Anyway, well, look, we'll keep you posted. We're really going to have some egg on our face if we're all suffering from coronavirus.
Well, if
next
we're all
week.
Dead, then it doesn't really matter. I suppose.
Then you'd be able to say, "What a bunch of dumbasses." Okay, yes. So, Josh. Our next link is one that I would call classic John Adkins territory. We've got a geographical development in Krakow. I've always, been hugely impressed by the way John can kind of, give an audio aerial view of the city.
We're going to get a bit canal now, aren't we?
Pan out. I don't get it again. Jesus, it's so complicated, your jokes are. Explain that one to me.
Mispronunciation of canal.
Dirty. Okay. Josh, go ahead.
I had to dredge that one up from somewhere. Yeah.
God, go ahead.
All right. So
spunking your joke cannon all over us.
There's a very interesting kind of transport infrastructure project under discussion at the moment, which is the idea is to link the river Wisła with the river Oder with a canal. Well, there is already some canal linkage from the Oder to as far as is it Oświęcim, I think. I'm not entirely sure of the details, but the idea is to extend this so that it joins up with the Wisła in Krakow, which will enable the water transport of coal. And coal transport is kind of heavy, but it doesn't need to be particularly rapid, and doing it by water is a very good idea on the whole. However, the Wisła in Krakow is not ideally designed for water transport, so the idea is to enlarge an existing waterway that kind of bypasses the little kink in the river where it passes the Wawel Castle into a full-sized, full-width canal so that this coal can be transported. This is like a super boring thing to try and explain in any kind of clarity, and I'm really doing my very best.
John does it better.
Thanks, mate. So there's all sorts of practical reasons why this isn't even going to get started, but it is nevertheless an interesting project, and it is the kind of thing that, in some ways, being a bit of a fan of civil engineering projects and like kind of stuff that moves on water, I'd be quite keen to see it go. But it looks like there's a couple of serious objections and one rather trivial objection, and one of the serious objections kind of harks back to a previous topic, which is that there is a planned major road linkage on the west side of the city connecting the kind of southwest side to the northwest side, which involves a river crossing. And if this expanded canal takes place, then that will massively screw with that. There's also the sheer physical cost involved of making this canal, which will involve like major earthworks and also areas where there are
digging. Idly low.
No, I'm really digging hard here. You can tell. And then there's the trivial objection, which I have to say I read it and it made me laugh, which was some kind of like city councillor or nobody or whatever who said, "But if they do this, the district of Dębniczki will become an island." Dębniczki, sorry. And you're thinking, like, so what? We're going to have to like airlift in supplies to people who live in Dębniczki after this. I think, to be honest, I mean, if you've been to Wrocław, the whole centre of the city is like little islands connected by bridges.
Stay strong, proud Dębniczkians.
Yeah. I mean, really, I'm sure they can cope.
Okay, as we were covering in our last story about the coronavirus, there's nothing that annoys us more than when a bunch of news people start trying to alarm the public with overblown claims. Which brings us along to African swine fever and the scary, scary pig situation.
Kill the pigs! Kill the pigs!
Okay, no, seriously here. Seriously. We're the canary in the coal mine on this one, Mikey. Nobody's listening to us. Even though there's article after article appearing on the old interweb every day, nobody's taking the Pigcopolis. So the southwestern town of Zari has reported a case of African swine fever 12 kilometres from the German border. I mean, this is a verified case. In total, the Polish authorities are reporting 20 new finding places of infected wild boar from western Poland this Wednesday.
So actually, hold on, this is the Germans getting upset about this.
Of course it is. They're terrified.
And you don't want the Germans getting nervous.
In western Poland, the number of new finding places, this is verified cases of African swine fever, which only broke out in November of last year, is on 151. Okay? This is just on the verge of breaking out, man. I'm telling you, we're all going to be ruled by pigs.
You see
one day.
your pig sneezing be very, very worried.
Yeah, I mean, look, gentlemen, I'm deeply concerned about this. What are you doing to please your future pig masters?
I'm eating as much bacon as I possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, you joke, Josh, but it disgusts me.
Okay, but look, do we yet? Yeah, I know I discuss, but do we yet have any evidence that swine flu infected pork is dangerous to human health?
No, there's nothing to do with that.
The industry, though, that's the problem.
It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that the populations are so out of control that we can't even cull them anywhere near enough. That they're a pest that's getting bigger all the time.
All right,
on top of that, they're carrying this deadly disease that's going to wipe out domestic pig populations. There's been cities in China that have had to kill up to 50 million fucking pigs, and to say the Chinese, which is the largest pork export market in the world, are nervous about this is an understatement of the most massive proportions.
It's not good for China at the moment, is it, really?
No, those damn Belarusian wild pigs started all this shit. Some dirty Belarusian bastards.
Bacon sandwich and a bottle of Corona, please.
Well, actually, the outbreak started, nobody knows where it started. It was on the border of Belarus and Poland. But the issue here is twofold. It's the threat to domestic pig populations, massive industry in Germany as well. The threat to global food stability if we lost that much pork, and at the same time, let's say that African swine fever doesn't go on, because the issue here, Josh, is just to visualize this, because I can see you're not worried about how much about I'm worried is if you've got like tens of thousands of pigs on a farm and one of them gets African swine fever, they're all pretty much
done.
fucked.
Yeah. No.
But in the wild, right? Even with us trying actively for the last 2 years to kill as many of them as possible, we can't even keep the numbers under control. So where are we heading here? We're heading for a situation where every city in Europe is like Barcelona, desperately fighting off pigs in every public space.
Okay, so the smart answer is, he says, like, kind of speaking with that kind of like unimpeachable self-confidence of someone who has not the faintest idea what he's talking about. The smart answer is that you develop a vaccine that protects domestic pigs 100% from African swine flu, and then you just leave the wild boars to succumb to it. And then, wild boar problem solved because they die of African swine flu. Domestic pig production problem solved because we have an effective vaccine.
Last week, I wasn't sure of your ability to kill a pig, and now I'm really not sure about your ability to run a pig killing program at a government level. So I appreciate the idea, Josh, but let me tell you what we're up against here, okay? 71-year-old gentleman who had 12 Hungarian Mangalika pigs, Polish gentleman, 71 years old, known in the media as Mr. Krzysztof from Osiek, southern Poland, had a heart attack on his farm. Would you like to know what happened next, Michael?
This was a scene in Hannibal, wasn't it?
No, Snatch, actually.
They fed him to the meep pigs.
Yeah, is that in Hannibal too?
Yes.
Didn't he eat his own victims in Hannibal?
No, we're thinking about like Silence of the Lambs, but in Hannibal, there was a scene where the industrialist that Hannibal had previously
spoiler alert
fed
his like opponents or people he didn't like to pigs as well.
Basically, this gentleman had raised these pigs from birth. He either, the report isn't sure, he either had a heart attack or he fell asleep drunk on vodka. But either way, the next day he literally was not there because he had been entirely devoured by these 12 pigs.
That's gratitude for you, isn't it?
They scared the shit out of me, wild boars. I'm just saying. They're evil.
They ate bones too, so there was basically nothing left, yeah.
I mean...
fragments left.
Be fair to say the Black Death ruined the rat's reputation forever, didn't it?
Which is a bit unfair, because it wasn't the rats so much as...
the flea.
They were just vectors, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think, well, it doesn't make any sense because African swine fever can't jump to humans, but whatever. Okay, so scared of pigs, always have been, always will be. Even Bear Grylls struggles with them. Okay, Polish people love porn. Michael, discuss.
From pork to porn, just one letter.
You sent me this link.
To porkin.
Poland has one of the highest daily traffic levels to Pornhub in the world.
Yeah, especially when you look at the population proportion thing. It's like Poles love their porn. And it turns out, 2019 Pornhub has released its statistics. This is something that John loves to do. He loved those Pornhub statistics. And I'm pretty sure he will comment on us talking about this week.
The US is way ahead still.
But it's the US, for Christ's sakes.
Who can guess who number 2 is, Josh? The number 2 most randy people on earth. Lonely wanking.
Finland?
No, Japan.
Yeah.
Would you like to know what number
They're
3
big in
is?
Japan.
No.
The UK. Okay, I'm not going to read all 20, but the Western European countries, the wealthy ones, seem to be far higher up the list than Poland. So, relatively speaking, even with all the Catholic guilt, even though this article implies that Poland are Europe's great wankers, they're nowhere near the top of the list. We got the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Germany,
what kind of
France.
news is this? You kicked it off by saying that Poland watches more porn than anybody else, and we've now established that.
Like what, the number 14 out of a world of 200 nations. It's gone up on the list. Plus Poland as well. Statistically, I think the average is that Polish women make up a larger proportion than the average in the world when it comes to watching porn by a couple of percent as well.
I can believe that, actually. Yeah.
Plus, I thought it was funny though because there was something like search terms in that article, the most commonly searched ones, and the top ones are all like polskie porno.
Yeah, very boring search terms, I have to say.
And like the thing is like, then they say it's like, then feet or lesbian or MILF. But when you look down the list, all the other ones are all about Poland as well. So if you count it up, you realize that Polish people are looking for Polish porn mainly when they go onto Pornhub.
Very patriotic.
Yeah.
Nationalistic wankers. Okay. Top 5 categories.
Or Asian stuff going on there.
Number 1 category, Josh?
If you'd like to make a small deposit in our
Josh,
PayPal account.
Josh, if I was to offer you 5 options, and the 5 options were alphabetically amateur, anal, lesbian, mature, MILF, which would you choose as the most popular?
Oh, right. Not my preference, but
No. I really don't want to hear your preference on porn. Really don't. I'm guessing it's a bit niche and you didn't hear it there. Just guess. Dead air is dead
MILF,
radio.
okay.
Yeah, MILF is correct. Yes. You're always good at quizzes, man.
He shoots, he scores.
Yeah, so
Maybe a
not
poor
much to say
metaphor.
about this, but elsewhere in Poland, in Central Europe, very different search terms. Apparently in Hungary, lesbian is the most popular search term. Does that surprise you?
I don't know many Hungarians.
Poland also stands out by having the highest proportion of female visitors. Go equality. Okay.
I guess us Polish guys aren't really, up to the task.
Yeah, no, a lot of, it's not just people slapping the sausage and, I can't think of a single other one now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this news has gone on for a while now. I mean, we could just draw a discreet curtain.
Yeah. Good on you, ladies.
Time to finish.
On a happy note, yeah.
Nice happy ending, yeah.
Oh, and we forgot to ask you to donate some sperm women money to the KrakCast. You know what to do. Hit the button.